Okay, everyone. Well, welcome to this session. I'll get going here. I'm hoping this can be sort of casual, and I would love to answer any questions along the way. So definitely let me know if you think of something in the middle of something that I'm saying. No worries, just pop it in the chat, and I will totally answer it. And of course, I'll leave some time at the end for a little bit of Q&A. But I thought I would start by introducing myself, and then if anybody else wanted to do a little quick introduction, they're totally welcome to, and I love that, but no pressure. But yeah, my name is Lauren. I am based here in Toronto, in Canada, and I work with an organization called Operation Groundswell. And what we do is we take young adults backpacking with a purpose, so we like to say. And what that really means is we go on adventures where the purpose is really to learn, to understand, and to engage in like a really meaningful way with the communities that we visit. I can get more into that later, but that's sort of really high level what I do. And I thought, because this is a conversation for gappers, I would also just really quickly share my experience, not exactly as a gapper, but just sort of the journey that I took to get where I am, working in travel, working in educational travel and experiential education, because nobody's path is linear and nobody's path is the same. So yeah, I grew up here in Toronto. I love it here. And after high school, I think both sort of my parents and the school that I was at and sort of the community at large had made me believe that I had to go to university, and for a very select few sort of disciplines. And at the time when I was graduating high school, I didn't have sort of the wherewithal or the resources or honestly the confidence to do anything differently than what I thought the path was supposed to be. So I actually ended up going to Queen's to study engineering. I wasn't exactly sure why. I didn't have a strong interest in engineering, but it felt like something that I could drop out of if I didn't like, maybe. So I went there to study, and I don't regret, any second of it. But I think it became pretty obvious pretty early on in my university career that I didn't want to be an engineer per se. I don't regret sort of any moments of it, like I said, but yeah, I think pretty early on I was like, I think there's something else for me. I'm not exactly sure what, but I think there's something else. I was really, really fortunate in my third year of university to go on an exchange and study in New Zealand. And so I was there for, was supposed to be 6 months and turned into sort of 8 months that I was living there. It was there that I really found, in a way, or not even found, but sort of just unlocked this love of adventure, experiencing new places. I always knew I loved different food, but just being sort of out in a different place and really gained a lot of confidence in that experience. So I came back and I was still studying engineering, and I graduated, and I still, for whatever reason, even though in the back of my mind I was like, I know there's something more, I still feel like I need to follow this predetermined path. And I started working for a giant company that makes a whole bunch of soda and pop, one of the big ones, as an engineer functionally. And so that was about a year of my life, and everyone was super lovely, but I also very quickly realized that I didn't want to spend my life making pop. So it was actually after my first year of work, after 4 years of university, that I took my gap year. And I took a full year after quitting my job to really understand what I valued and what I loved and how I could, make a difference in the world, but really just sort of do what I felt was important, the work that I wanted to do. So yeah, I took my gap year after working, and it was the most amazing thing I ever did. And I think my life would have had a different trajectory, totally, if I had taken that a little bit earlier. And not to say that anything was better or worse, but just to say that there's definitely no linear path. And yeah, I'm glad that I was supported enough to do that even at the time that I did. Gap years can happen anytime. So anyway, that's a little bit about me. After I quit that job, I got into the travel industry and I started working as a guide. Was really lucky to travel all over the world, leading hiking trips, and eventually found myself at this intersection of education and travel at Operation Groundswell, which I just love with my whole heart. So I think what we want to talk about actually is how you design and sort of choose a responsible, impactful gap year, especially if you're looking to travel somewhere else. So, there's a lot of questions that need to be answered when you're thinking about traveling. Um, the first question in my mind was, do I travel by myself or with a group? And there's definitely pros and cons to both. Before I found Operation Groundswell, a lot of the travel I had done was by myself because I was like, I felt invincible and I thought I could do anything and be anyone. And in that moment, I could. I did a lot of solo travel before finding group travel and sort of the beauty in that. And there's a time and place for both, for sure. But thinking about whether you want to go by yourself or with a group is definitely a question you want to ask. Depending on, of course, your experience, going by yourself might feel and actually be really scary. There is this sort of extra sense of independence if you research it well and you feel confident enough to do it. But you are sort of being thrown into the deep end a little bit if you start your first epic adventure by yourself. There's lots of ways of sort of finding an in between totally solo travel and group travel. If you have family members that live in a different country or even a different place in Canada, can you travel by yourself to visit them or to stay with them, or friends? If there's a group travel program that allows for some independent exploration either before or after, preferably after, I guess, is that something that could work for you? I would say traveling with a group as one of your sort of first experiences, or even if you've had a bit of travel experience, can be a really incredible thing. Because often it's a group of other individuals who may or may not have wanted to travel by themselves, but are finding this really exciting thing in traveling together for the first time. So the pros to traveling with a group is you have that sense of independence and confidence building while being supported and sort of bottom lined by an organization that has your safety top of mind, and also has experience and friends and family in that place that you're visiting. And so should anything go wrong, they can give you support that you need. Of course, the logistical headaches are great to have taken care of. Sometimes it's nice to not worry about, where you're going to eat, so you can actually just worry about soaking in every other million bajillion things that are going on, like the language and the smells and the sights and all these other things that are happening. Because sometimes even just like those really basic, like where am I going to sleep tonight and where am I going to eat, having that taken care of can be huge, and it lets you experience everything else really deeply. Like I said, connecting with other like-minded people is awesome. It's really cool to see how close you can become with a really small group of people because you're experiencing something together for the first time. So like travel friends are just the coolest because you have something shared that literally nobody else in the entire world can sort of take from you or experience in the same way that you did. And you still build so many of those skills that will allow you to travel by yourself in the future. So yeah, that's sort of the first question. Do you want to go by yourself or with a group? And sort of how do I unpack that one way or the other? Another question that's sort of independent of group or solo travel is, where in the world do I want to go? And I think this is a question that gets asked, really often. It's like, oh, where do you want to go? Where do you want to go? Where do you want to go? I would challenge you to ask yourself, why? Why do you want to go to, I don't know, Peru, if that was your first instinct? Is it because of, a picture that you've seen? Is it because of a story that you've read? Is it because you know somebody who's from there? And I would just dig into sort of why you want to go to that place, because we all have such interesting perspectives of all these different places, but they all come from the things that we read and the things that we see. And depending on what you experience, like, on social media or in the news or whatever, you're going to have a really different perspective of that place than probably the people who live there or people who live in a different country, just depending on what media you consume. So yeah, asking yourself why is a really interesting question, because you might find some things there that you didn't expect. If there are places that you would travel to by yourself or not others, why you think that might be. If you want to travel somewhere that you wouldn't feel comfortable traveling by yourself, is there an opportunity to travel with a group? Just dig into that question of why, because travel is so much more than just the place. It's so much more than just the landscape. It's the people, it's the food, it's the smells, it's the culture, it's the customs. It's sort of this like whole complete experience. And I will say there's probably something for everyone everywhere. You don't need to go to Chile to hike. You can find hiking in your own backyard, of course, as I'm sure you've had to discover over the past couple of years being at home. But there really is something everywhere, even though some places might be better known for some things than others. There is something for everyone everywhere. So yeah, where in the world? Where in the world do you want to go and why? I would say like sistered to that experience or that question of where in the world is what do you want to learn or what do you want to experience? Like, do you have something that you care about so much that you need to go to a particular place to find that? Most often when I talk to participants who are joining Operation Groundswell programs, we hear folks who are saying like, I just want to see the world, learn about a different culture, see a new place. And like that's kind of it, which is awesome. But like, let's dig a little bit deeper. Do you have something that you care a lot about? Are you super passionate about social justice and human rights? Do you care so much about environmental sustainability, environmental justice? Do you want to learn more about business, like entrepreneurship, social entrepreneurship, youth entrepreneurs? Do you want to learn about the supply chain? Are you interested in logistics? Or maybe like you love food systems or sustainable farming, agriculture. You really want to get your hands dirty, learn how to plant things, see what grows in different parts of the world. There's programs that we have that are focused on art and music and dance, and how finding organizations that use like dance and all these co-curricular activities to support youth that would otherwise be like at risk or get into trouble can find something really meaningful in art and dance. Are you just there to hike? Do you just want to challenge yourself physically and get out there and walk around the world? Any of those things can be experienced in any place, but there are different programs that are designed specifically to, unpack or address some of those subject areas. And knowing what you're trying to get out of it or what you're interested in learning can help you sort of like narrow down which programs you might be interested in doing. For example, we've got a program just around food in Ecuador, and not like just eating food, although we do a lot of that, but really understanding like, what does it mean to grow the food that you eat? What does it take to have a diverse, group of plants and vegetables and meats and nutrients? And can we do that all, on this piece of land or, by ourselves? What's the difference between like a really local and like a super global supply chain when it comes to food? So if that's your thing, find a program that talks about that. I would say it's totally worth looking into that and thinking about what you might be interested in, because it can just connect you even further with people who also think like that or who have those same interests and ideas about food, for example, if that's your thing. What do you want to learn or experience? Does anybody have any sort of like questions so far? I realize I get excited, and so I just go on these big rambles. But feel free to, like I said, pop your questions in the chat along the way if you think of them. Cool. All right. Awesome. I will keep going on my checklist of things that you want to ask yourself or think about when you're designing a travel experience. A couple other big ones are, how long can I travel for? Do I want to travel for? And also, am I able to travel for? And sort of tied to that, what is my budget? So I'll talk about budgeting a little bit after. And I know Michelle and all the folks at CanGap have lots of resources on budgeting around your gap year as well, but I'll speak to it specifically related to travel. The first question around like, how long are you going to travel for? Like, how much time do you have? How much time do you think you can handle or you want to have, and how might that change if you're doing sort of solo travel versus guided travel? For example, we have 40-day programs where for the first 3 weeks you're with the group. We do everything together. We learn a whole bunch of stuff. We learn the language. We eat the food. We get a lay of the land. And then for the next 10 days, you're by yourself. And so there's an opportunity to sort of learn the skills before being on your own, and having that experience traveling by yourself, but still within sort of like the leadership and the comfort of group travel. So how long do you have? And if you're looking for different programs from different operators, like what are the options that they have? Some operators might only offer short programs, some might offer long programs. So that's sort of something to ask when you're finding someone to travel with as well. And then getting to sort of like the budget piece, what's your budget? Travel is inherently pretty expensive, and I totally get that. We're super focused on financial accessibility because we know how tough it can be, and these experiences shouldn't be limited to, only people who can afford a bajillion-dollar trip. But there's so many ways that you can sort of make it happen. And I just want to share like a few quick tips. You can, if your budget is like $1,000, you can make that $1,000 go a lot further if your flights take up less of that budget, for example. So if you're traveling from Toronto and you want to go outside of the country, traveling to Guatemala is going to have a much smaller price tag than traveling to Vietnam or Thailand, for example. And flights can really quickly eat up a lot of that budget. So just being conscious of where in the world you travel to based on flight prices can make a big difference, because the less you spend on flights, the more you have to spend in country. Another thing to consider is traveling from place to place is expensive. And the two biggest things when you travel by yourself, if you travel by yourself, that really eat up your budget are transportation from place to place and accommodation, and food a little bit, depending on where you are. But there's something really beautiful and awesome about staying in one place and really immersing in that place and getting to know that place. And so I would just say, resist the urge to travel to, say, Southeast Asia and then jump around every 2 days trying to check a whole bunch of places off your list. Because not only does that sort of like creep up in costs, it also doesn't let you soak up everything that a place has to offer. So yeah, I just like think about why you want to do certain things. Like, why would I want to go spend 2 days here, spend 2 days here, spend 2 days here? Like, is there a different way of doing it? And what could I get out of one way or the other? So just, always ask yourself why. So traveling and accommodations, I say, are most expensive things when you travel by yourself. And related to that, just looking at sort of the cost of living in each place can also be really helpful. Like if you can know how much the average meal costs, for example, or what local food costs, that's super helpful. I would say that a lot of those questions get answered automatically, or you don't even have to really think about it if you travel with a group that has everything included. And so just sort of like tying that together, I would say when you're choosing an organization to travel with or a group to travel with, make sure that you check and double check and triple check and know exactly what's included or what's not included. Because sometimes a program can look really appealing right at first. You're like, oh, like that's really inexpensive. That sounds great. For like 14 days, I can do all these things. And then you look at sort of the fine print and, none of the meals are included, or only like half of the accommodation is, or something like that. So yeah, just definitely look at that. At OG, we try to take the confusion out of it, and sort of everything from start to finish is included, because it can be really annoying or stressful or confusing to have to deal with sort of money every single day, and budgeting. And again, the more you have to think about those like details, the less mental space you have to experience everything else that's going on around you. And of course, the point is to learn those skills, but the point is to not overwhelm you at the beginning and to sort of pick it up as you go along. The other thing that I would say is look into financial assistance grants. There's a lot of sort of school programs, sometimes even government programs, and sometimes programs within the travel operator that you're traveling with that provide financial assistance to folks for lots of different reasons. There could be like scholarships, there could be grants. At OG, for example, we provide financial assistance grants on a needs basis that can be up to like 25% of your program fee, which is pretty significant when you sort of like calculate it out and think about it. So it can make a really big difference if you're able to fundraise. So definitely think about that. Look at your options, ask friends, ask people who have traveled before to these places, sort of what their experience was. But But know that there are options, and there's also options to fundraise. We provide a lot of fundraising support because it's an option for people, whether it's for yourself or for a portion of the program or for the whole thing. There are some ways that you can sort of fundraise and make your way to these places. So yeah, keep an open mind and you can make it happen. Cool. The next sort of things I just wanted to talk through for the rest of the time that we have were around like choosing a program or organization. I talked about it a little bit at the beginning related to sort of what interests you and seeing what programs are available for those specific interests, because that can have a huge impact on your experience. But there are just so many options out there, and it can be super overwhelming. And you also want to feel like you're getting an experience that you want to have and that is worth the money that you're spending on this, hopefully life-changing adventure. Different programs will have different goals for sure. And so you might not necessarily know exactly what your goals are going into the program, but at least getting an idea of what that organization's like values are can help you see if you're sort of at least aligned with what they're doing and the way that they're doing it. So yeah, I think it's really important to think about how to find a responsible, ethical, and like sustainable, or at least striving to be sustainable operator, especially as we recognize all of the sort of social injustice and environmental crisis that we're living through. Travel is not only like expensive on the wallets, but it's also impactful to the environment. Flights. But there are so many good things that can come out of it that it's worth it, in my opinion. So yeah, when you're choosing a program or an organization, there's a lot of things that you might want to ask both yourself, but also to the organization as well. The questions you want to ask yourself are sort of the stuff that I was talking about earlier, like where do you want to go? Why do you want to go there? Yeah, sort of what do I want to learn? Do they provide sort of that experience? And like, what do I want to do on that program? And how long do I want to travel for? So like all of those things are sort of internal. You got to ask yourself and figure it out and sort of, yeah, take it from there. But yeah, like I said, there's lots of questions that you can and should ask the organization that you might want to travel with. Most, I would say all of them should be happy to talk to you if they have sort of nothing to hide. I know I anyway, love talking to participants. It's like the best thing in the world because there's so much that's like yet to be seen, and talking about people who are about to travel is just so exciting because I feel like I'm getting ready to travel with them and it's the best. So yeah, I think one of the first questions to ask if you are going to be engaging with local communities, which I hope you do because that's so much of the experience, is sort of like what's the relationship between the organization and the communities they visit. If you're on sort of like a service learning program where you're like actively working with communities on projects, like what does that relationship look like? And how do I sort of find proof of that? Like, really, really briefly, there's volunteer experiences that don't necessarily keep like actually the well-being and the goals of local communities in mind. Often well-intentioned, but unfortunately the impact of going somewhere and feeling like you need to have a certain experience or make a certain experience can lead to some pretty challenging impacts on local communities. So trying to understand what the relationship between the organization, the travel operator, and the places they visit is really important. So saying, okay, I'm going to be traveling to Guatemala and we're going to be learning about coffee. What are the local organizations that we're going to be working with? What are we going to be doing with them? Is it sort of like a mutually beneficial and wonderful exchange? Or sort of like, where does that power dynamic live, right? So it can be tough to ask these questions to operators, but it's super important because it definitely really impacts how your dollars are spent and how far they go and sort of the impact that they have. on the ground in the places that we visit. Our approach is very much to work sort of like in solidarity with organizations and not in charity, in that the goal is to work together to find a solution for the folks that we're working with. And not that we will find the solution, but that we will support them in finding their solution to the challenges that they face. And the goal really just being to learn from each other and yeah, learn together. I think personally, I had a really eye-opening experience the first time that I went on a program, because before then I had only ever traveled by myself. I was like, I can do this alone. I like lived in New Zealand. I, cycled the length of Vietnam for fun. I did this like epic 20-day hiking trip. Like, I'm good. I know how to travel. And then I heard about OG, and it was like, okay, backpacking with a purpose. What does that mean? Don't really get it. Don't really believe it. Seems sort of like fake or too good to be true. Like, it doesn't make any sense. But I had a friend who was working there, and they were like, no, like just go on a program and then talk to me. And I was like, okay, I can do that. So I went on an OG program, and it was to Guatemala, and it was our Mayan Roots program focused on sort of like the Mayan people in Guatemala and how they represent over 50% of the population. And so how important that culture is in everyday life in Guatemala, and sort of what the history of it has been, and how that like looks in everyday modern life. Anyway, that's a bit of a tangent, but the point is I went to Guatemala with Operation Groundswell, and I was like a little bit on my high horse. I was like, oh, like I'm just here for the sake of being here. I could do this trip by myself, no problem. Like, I don't need to be with a group of people to have this experience. And then I got there, and not only was the rest of my group amazing, which is just, yeah, part of that's luck, part of that's design, but the people were amazing. But most importantly, what I realized is that because Operation Groundswell had all of these relationships with partners already, it was like walking into a family home and being welcomed as family. And I never could have done that by myself. I never would have known to go to that house or that corner or that town and talk to that guy who would tell me about this thing by myself. There's just no way. Because organizations that are trusted by local communities are welcomed and have that sort of like family and friend relationship where you're being welcomed into this community as though they've known you forever, because they've known the organization forever, and there's trust. And meeting all of these incredible people and organizations from, restorative like reforestation projects to like a Mayan culture preservation to a museum to just like literally one individual who had an urban garden in the back of his house. Like, there were just so many elements where I would just like think to myself, I never could have done this by myself. And I feel so lucky to be welcomed into such like an intimate group of like amazing people. And so that was a really big humbling moment for me, where I was like, okay, I can't do this by myself because I don't have those connections. I don't have that knowledge, and I want more of it. I love it so much. So anyway, what is the relationship between the organization and the communities they visit, and how can that impact your experience? This is also a little bit related to sort of like, yeah, what work will we be doing and how will I be engaging? So yeah, who's leading the activities? Whose idea was it? Who has the power again? Who are the activities for? Like, are we planting trees for the sake of planting trees so we can feel good? Or do these trees serve a purpose? Yeah, so that's a question. Another piece is around environmental sustainability. It's something that can't even be like an afterthought anymore, and is hopefully at the forefront of everyone's minds when we talk about travel, but also just about doing anything in our lives, because we're living in it. And I would say it's amazing that most travel organizations now care about environmental sustainability and have it as a priority. But I would encourage you to ask how exactly they're walking the talk. Yeah, walking the talk. Because it's one thing to offset your carbon emissions or offset your flight, but it's another thing entirely to design a program to be as low impact as possible, because offsetting is reactive. You're like reacting to a problem or reacting to something that you created or caused. Designing a program to be not very impactful, to work with partners who are advocating for environmental justice, is a very different thing. And yeah, in our efforts to do as best we can with what we know, that's just something to consider. So like, what does their environmental sustainability program look like? And am I on board? Does this make sense to me? Another obvious one is looking for unbiased reviews. So I'm sure the fact that you're here, I'm sure you have lots of resources at your fingertips to look for sort of like programs and reviews and all of these things. But yeah, unbiased reviews are awesome because there's no better sort of tell of how the program went than from people who've already been on the program. So there's websites like Go Overseas. Yeah, lots of review sites that have information and experiences from people who've been on programs. So yeah, that's another one. Are your values aligned with the values of the organization? Like, is there a mission statement that's really clear on their website that you can be like, yeah, like that checks out. That feels good to me. I believe in that. Or can you ask them? Yeah, so are their values clear? Can I talk to somebody, like a human being, like a real person from the organization or an alumni to tell me about their experience? At OG, part of our process in taking folks in to join our programs is actually like an interview with an alumni. So after you apply, you get to book a conversation with an alumni, and the point is really for you to ask your questions about the program and about OG, because we don't want there to be any surprises, because the worst thing would be for you to show up and have no idea what you got yourself into. So is there an opportunity to talk to an alumni? Because that's a really, like I said before, just like a really unbiased, awesome firsthand way to know what's up. So yeah, even just reach out to the organization and say like, hey, could you put me in touch with somebody who's been on a program? Or yeah, don't be afraid to ask. What's the size of the groups of the travel, like that go on the programs? And also, how big is the organization in total? And how might that sort of impact my own experience? Typically, if you're traveling for the first time somewhere far, far away, a smaller group can feel really lovely because it's intimate and you do it all together, and you can get really close with the small group of people you're traveling with. So that's what I would recommend for sort of group travel in total. And also just the impact that small groups have in the places that we visit is so much less, because bringing a group of 40 people to a community of 30 people isn't particularly sustainable and doesn't leave the impact that I think most of us want to have on these amazing people who host us in their homes. So yeah, think about the size of the organization, of the group itself, and how that might impact your experience. Do I know, or how do I get an idea of who I will be traveling with? Travel is such like a personal thing. Like, you're going to be, sharing a bus with these people. You're going to be sharing meals with these people. You're going to be spending all of your time with people you've never met. Is there a way to sort of get an idea of who they are, what they're like, what they don't like? A lot of the times you won't be able to know that, and that's sort of part of the beauty and the fun, is getting that diversity of experiences and perspectives. But if there's a process that the organization uses, or if there's a way to connect with them before, can you do that? For us, like, part of that interview process is really getting to know the people who are joining our programs, because travel is such a unique experience. And so knowing that we have folks with just an open mind and sort of like an eagerness to learn is amazing, because that's all you need to be a kind person on a program in a new place, is just sort of that empathy and willingness. And then also, what style of travel is it that I'm going to be joining? Like, what did I sign up for? Am I going to be staying in like 5-star hotels and eating at the fanciest restaurants? Am I going to be sleeping in bunk beds, or am I going to be camping? What does that sort of look like? So ask all the questions that you have. Don't be afraid to ask all these questions, because it's really important, and it'll make the experience that you want. So yeah, think local. Like, do they buy, are they going to eat at like McDonald's every day? Are they going to eat at local restaurants? Are they going to stay in like international hotel chains? Are they going to stay in sort of like, family run hotels or hostels? And then sort of the most obvious one that like gappers would probably be the most, familiar with would probably be like marketing. Who is at the center of their marketing? Who do they feature? What does it look like? How does it feel? How do they portray folks of the communities that they're visiting? How do they portray folks who travel with them? And like, does it feel good? Because it's really important. The last sort of thing that I'll just touch on before opening it wide open to questions is around this question of impact. I think when we design an adventure like this, all we want to do is to have impact. We're like, I want to make the absolute most out of this experience that I have. I want to have an impact. I want to leave an impact. I want so many things out of like, this 1 week that I have to travel somewhere. And I think we just need to be really realistic about what that week can be, because it can be transformative in so many ways. But this idea of impact is definitely, it's a huge expectation that we try to live up to in ourselves. And so when we think of the impacts that we're going to have, I would challenge you to think of sort of like on who. If you're traveling somewhere to volunteer to help or to have an impact on the community that you visit, we often think about impact like that. Like, who can I help? What is my impact going to be on the world or on these people? And I think like the beautiful reality is that we need to learn and like unlock in ourselves everything that we're capable of, everything that we care about, who we want to be as humans, as part of this global community. And that's the value in traveling. When we travel, we learn about ourselves because we're learning about other people. We learn about how we're the same, how we're different. We learn about the challenges that they face, how they're similar to ours, how they're totally different to ours, how they relate, even though they are totally different to ours. Like, we're not, you or I aren't going to show up in Ecuador and change the world. We're not going to save the world. We're not going to save Ecuador. We're not going to save or help probably even one single person in like a really tangible way. But what we are going to do is we're going to look into ourselves, and we are going to find something meaningful in that experience that inspires us to do awesome things when we get home. It's sort of that like ignition or that spark that you need to sort of like think globally when you're at home. It's like, you may have heard the phrase, and it's a little overused, but I think it is so true, and that we sort of like act how we can where we are, but with a global perspective. And that perspective is so incredible and powerful. So yeah, that's my little like last little bit on impact, just because I think it's something that we just expect so much from, but don't think about too much. And I would just encourage you to think that your travel experience doesn't start when you get to the country, and it definitely shouldn't end when you come home. And so how do you make an experience like this somewhere like halfway around the world be a part of your everyday life before and after? How can you do as much research before to feel like you can be a respectful, conscientious, and like educated participant or visitor to somebody else's home? And that context will help you experience your travel so much better, and so much more like deeply, which is amazing. And then again, afterwards, what did I learn and how do I bring those experiences with me through the rest of my life? And that part of it has to happen after you have the experience, because it's really hard to like sit here now without having gone anywhere at all and be like, oh, like afterwards, what am I going to do? Because like you have no idea, because you don't know how it's going to change you. But I think the cool thing about travel when it's done in a really intentional way, and a really like educational way, is that the experience is with us for the rest of our lives, and we don't compartmentalize the experience where it was and when it happened. Um, Stuff like this sticks with you forever, and if done well and responsibly and with a lot of intention, it can be a really sort of critical moment in your life, and hopefully inspire just like a lifetime of curiosity and adventure, and like empathy for people everywhere around the world. So that's all I had in terms of word vomit and talking to you about all this stuff. I would love to field any questions, so please feel free to pop them in the chat or the Q&A. I don't exactly know what the best way of doing it is. Even just probably just the chat would be awesome. I see that Mary had to head out, which is totally cool. But for anyone who's still here, if there's any questions about Operation Groundswell, about me, about a specific place that you're thinking of traveling to, definitely leave them here and I will do my best to answer. Anybody have anything else that they are curious about, that they want to share, they just want to chat about? I think there's still a couple of people hanging around. If anybody is still sort of listening or out there, if you wanted to share maybe where you're thinking of traveling, and I can speak to that place specifically. If anybody has questions about travel in COVID, I can do my best to answer from the perspective of a tour operator. If you are in the session and not sure where to leave your questions and answers, It should just be on the right panel. And then you can go to sort of session and ask your questions under the chat section. Cool. Okay. Well, for the last sort of 10 minutes that I have, for anyone who's still out there, I thought it might be helpful to sort of hear maybe what like a sample Operation Groundswell program looks like or feels like. And that might help you sort of like imagine what your adventure could also look like, whether it's with us or elsewise. So the best way I can think to do it is by just really simply walking you through a program. So I think the one that I always use because it's good and I like it is our Seed to Shelf program in Guatemala. And maybe by walking you through sort of the story of the program, you can just get excited about travel again and what it might be like. So our Seed to Shelf program is in Guatemala and it's 9 days. And it's called Seed to Shelf because the idea behind the program is that we follow a coffee bean from seed when it's grown all the way to the shelf of the grocery stores or your cup at Starbucks or wherever you get your coffee in the place that you call home. So how we do that is by working with partners in Guatemala all throughout those 9 days that represent different parts of that supply chain. So we start in sort of the fields just outside of Antigua. We work with an organization called De La Gente, and they're a fair trade coffee organization that provide grants and funding and support and land sometimes to local farmers to grow their coffee in a sustainable way and to sell it directly to folks around the world. So they're a really cool cooperative, and they will take us on a tour of the fields, and we'll have lunch with one of the farmers and sort of show us what it takes to grow a coffee plant. It's amazing being up in the fields at really high altitudes, sort of like on the sides of volcanoes, just seeing where it's grown and how much work seriously goes into like a single cup of coffee. They show the sort of traditional process of roasting it over a fire at home, grinding it with the traditional method. None of these like mechanical grinders or anything like that. And just showing us what it takes to grow this plant and process it, which is a lot. We spend some time in Antigua. We head around, and we'll also get to meet a little bit later on with a community called Santanita. And they are a community of coffee farmers who most, if not all of them, were fighters in the Civil War. So at one point in time, they were sort of guerrilla fighters in the Civil War. And after the war, they were sort of given a whole bunch of beans and a little bit of land that at the time was pretty infertile, and sort of said, "All right, go figure it out. Here's your stuff. We'll leave you to it. We've relocated your entire town, and this is what we're doing, sort of like in exchange." We'll learn a little bit more, obviously, about the war itself and sort of the fallout and what happened, and importantly, how these folks are using coffee to sort of regrow their community and rebuild after a long Civil War. And so they're really, really cool people, and we'll stay with them for a few days, in the fields, helping them with whatever thing is going on at that time, and just sort of see what they're up to, see what they're working on, see how a community built around coffee can sort of grow in so many other ways as well. We spend a little bit of time in Sheila talking to our friend Willie at an organization called Desgua. And what they do is work with Guatemalan and specifically Mayan youth and help them realize what they call a Guatemalan dream. And so that's sort of their play or their response to the American dream. And the reason that Willie started this organization is because he himself was an immigrant or I guess like an expatriate who immigrated to the US and has since moved back to Guatemala. And he wants to help Guatemalan youth see how they can fulfill their dreams at home. That you know, trying to move to the States or elsewhere doesn't have to be the only solution, and that having and celebrating culture and family and community at home can be successful and fulfilling and wonderful as well. They also help sort of repatriate and reintegrate youth who've returned from going to the United States. And so they do a lot of work with people who've come home as well, and just creating a community around these sort of like migrant folks who go back and forth and experience a lot of sort of like cultural dissonance between the States and Guatemala, and how to sort of like reclaim your identity and your place as a Guatemalan. So he's super cool. He's got a lot to say, and it's awesome to sort of talk about his story and talk with him about his story, and just get a different perspective than the ones that we see in the news about migrants from sort of like the South. So yeah, I spent some time with Willie and Shayla, which is one of the bigger cities. We're sort of in a valley amongst all the volcanoes. It's very beautiful. It's very cool. And we end the program at the lake, and the lake in Guatemala is Lago Atitlan. And it's a lake surrounded by a number of beautiful little towns that are right on the water, and a number of volcanoes, some of which are active. And we stay there to sort of like collect our thoughts and ourselves and rest our bodies, and just unpack everything that we've experienced in the last week. At the lake, we work with a number of really cool partners. One of them is called Alma de Colores, and they're a social enterprise who work with folks with disabilities and give them meaningful employment. So they teach them skills like weaving or crafts or cooking or baking, and then employ them in their own restaurant or in their own sort of weaving workshop to provide, meals, a restaurant, and then sort of like tourist goods for visitors to San Juan, which is the town that we stay in. So they're really cool. They run a vegetarian restaurant, which is delicious. And their garden, or one of their gardens, I should say, is actually on the site that Operation Groundswell has in San Juan. That's called the Hub. And so they grow all of their organic fruits and vegetables at the Hub where we're staying. And so we get to visit their gardens, help out in the gardens, do some weeding, learn about the plants, and then eat at the restaurant as well, which is a real treat. In San Juan, we also visit another coffee cooperative called Cooperativa Lavos. And they're a smaller cooperative of farmers in the San Juan area, sort of around the lake. And they work, they're relatively new, but they're super awesome. And we'll take another coffee tour with them and specifically dig into sort of the supply chain. So not so much on the production of coffee, but more on what happens between when the coffee is picked and then shipped and then received in places all around the world. So they'll talk to us about the economics of it, which are interesting if you care about it, but they're interesting even if you don't. I'm not even a coffee drinker, like a big coffee drinker, and I found this part of it to be actually the most interesting because it's really just shocking, but important to see how much gets lost along the way, how much value is sort of extracted out of the coffee in every step along the way after it's farmed, and ultimately how much of that ends up in the pockets of the farmers who've put all the work into growing the beans. So yeah, talking with those guys about import and export and like what are the laws around it and how do you navigate this colossal industry as sort of like a small direct trade producer, because it's becoming more and more the norm where people are asking for or demanding their coffee to be sustainably produced, but it's definitely not absolutely normal just yet. And so seeing how they're trying to carve out that space for themselves and really like accurately value their time and their work and their product is really interesting. So we stay with them at the lake. We learn from them. We hear from what they are all about. Obviously, test their coffee and chat with them as well. And we'll also learn from local women who practice the art of backstrap weaving. So I wasn't familiar with the practice before I experienced it in Guatemala for the first time, but it's a traditional way of weaving a loom and weaving textiles to turn into all different products like, skirts, other clothing, scarves, really anything that you can imagine. And we'll learn about the process of naturally dyeing cotton thread, spinning thread as well, and then using natural dyes to create colors. And the whole process of from creating the thread to setting up the loom to dyeing all the colors to setting up a pattern so that the textile has a particular look or design, thinking about the meaning of all those designs and really being artistic about it and thinking about what am I going to put on this fabric that means something to me and my culture. And then weaving the fabric and then turning it into all these amazing things. So yeah, we learn from the weavers at the lake, get to know how they do it, who they work with, what their inspiration is. And then we stay at the hub, like I said, which is Operation Groundswell's sort of secondary thing. It's our little home away from home in San Juan. And we'll be there with our friend Edwin, who works at the hub. And it's a lovely little spot by the lake with a dry composting toilet and solar power, and gardens and banana trees and 2 really sweet dogs. And it's just sort of the perfect place to unwind after a super intense but epic week of adventuring. So in a nutshell, that's what the program looks like, just as an example. All of our programs have a similar sort of story arc and purpose and focus, but importantly, we want to make sure that we're seeing that issue or challenge from all different perspectives and all of the different angles and people that are affected by it. So yeah, I hope that was helpful. If anyone has any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. I'm at lauren@operationgroundswell.com, or you can call us pretty much anytime at our phone number on our website. And I hope you learned something, or if this was helpful, even a little bit.